Today's daf is daf Kuf Yud Ches, and we're learning about the difference between Tumas Ochlin and Tumas Nevela. In the case of Tumas Ochlim, if we have, let's say, less than a shear of a kibetza of Ochel, but there's a husk that surrounds and protects the kernel, then that husk could be mashlim the shear of kibetza for Tumas Ochlin. In the case of Tumas Nevela, on the other hand, where the shear is a kizayis, then if we have R, the hide that covers the meat of the carcass, and that meat itself is less than a kizayis, we cannot integrate the hide into the shear of kizayis in order to establish Tumas Nevela. And the Gemara on Daf Kuf Yud Zayin Amud Beis that we saw yesterday derives this halacha with regard to Ochlin. And again, let's just review that Tumas Ochlin is called Tuma Kala because in Ochlin, the Tuma, let's say if a sheretz falls in an Ochel, is only what's called a Rishon L'Tum. It's not an Ava Tum, whereas Nevela in and of itself is Tomei, and therefore it's an Ava Tum. And the nafkamina is that a Rishon L'Tuma could be Matame other Ochlim, but it cannot be Matame Adam V'Kelim. Adam V'Kelim can only contract Tuma by virtue of an Ava Tuma. So Nevela has that power, and it's therefore it's called Tuma Chamura. As far as Tuma Kal is concerned with Ochlim, so we had the drasha of Rabbi Yishmael, I'll call Zera Zarua Asher Yizra, and that teaches us that even the husk that surrounds the kernel can be integrated into the kibetza of the ochel to be mashlim the shear, whether it's the husk of a kernel of wheat, a kernel of barley, a kernel of lentils. It makes no difference. Now, the Gemara then embarked on a search for another drasha, another yalfusa, to exclude a shomer, like, for example, the hide that protects the meat from being integrated into the kizayis for Tumas Nevela. And the Gemara quoted a brisa that derived such a miyut from bin nivlasa. V'lo be'ar she'ein alav kizayis basar. Okay. Later on, we're going to discuss a case where you have a kizayis basar that's attached to the R, to the hide, and would that hide be a vehicle? I'm looking for a different word to transmit tuma to the nevela. I'm sorry, to the basar. All right. In any event, that's the drasha of Benivlasa. So now we're on the top of Yud Kuf Yud Ches Omer Aleph, and by a comment here, this daf is enormously complicated. It's really like a puzzle, and you have to fit in many different elements into the puzzle. It's all drashos, limudim, tzadashaves, miutim, ribuyim, etc. Hekeshim. I mean, it's very, very complicated. You would probably need hours and hours to prepare. We'll try to do the best we can in the context of a daf yomi. Yochol hanogea keneged basa me'achor v'lo yeitameh. The Gemara is not exactly sure what that means, but let's just translate it literally. let's say the hide is attached to the basar, to the meat, and somebody comes in contact with the hide, and that hide is um, is attached to the meat, and he touches the back of the hide. Is lo tame? I might think that there is no tuma in this case. Talmud Lomer, for that we need a drasha of yitma. And yitma is a pasuk in Vayikra Perek Yud Aleph, which we discussed yesterday, and that's pasuk lamites v'chiyamus min v'hem asher hi lachem li'achlan ogeb nivlasa yitma ad ha'aretz. So my ka'ama, let's try to understand this brisa that we have here on the top of the Amud, and we want to know that in a case where the hide is attached to less than a kizayis worth of meat, and therefore the hide itself is excluded from conveying tuma because we don't have a shear of tumas nevela of a kizayis, then what does the Mishnah derive from Yitma? That if you come in contact with the back of the hide, then you become Tame. If we're talking about a case where there's no kizayis of basar, and we cannot integrate the shomer, in this case the or, to be mashlim the kizayis, Omar Rava, the Amrile, others say kidi. We've had the word kidi many times. Kidi is either an anonymous Amora, or maybe the Amora's name was kidi. Chisure mechzer v'achiktani. We have to rewrite the brisa and add a little bit more to the brisa. Binivlasa. So the Torah says that if you come in contact with Hanogeh binivlasa yitmara arev, and the word binivlasa we said was coming to exclude the shomer as far as tumas nevela, meaning the hide, to tell me that you're only going to be tameh if you actually come in contact. Again, keep in mind that, as we said before, nevela is an avatumas matame out of v'kelim. If you come in contact with the meat itself, velo ba'ar. But if the hide is attached to a smaller volume of meat that's less than a kizayis, she'enol of kizayis basar, v'ar mashlima lekizayis, and we're saying now that the shomer cannot be integrated with the basar to create a kizayis for tumas nevela. Yochel, I might go a step further, logically. Shani motzi af or sheyeshalav kizayis basar. Maybe what the Torah has in mind here is that even if the basar that's attached to this hide is a kizayis worth of basar, I might think that even in that case, the contact with the shomer, meaning with the hide, is not going to be metame. So for that, we need a special ribui. Hanogea ben keneged basar me'achorov yachalo yitame. And I'm going to skip a few words for a second. Talmud Lomer Yitma. So we're going to derive from the extra word Yitma that if the hide is attached to basar that is basar nevela that is a kizayis worth, and you come in contact with that hide, then you become tamei with tumas nevela. And why is that so? Afilu maisi yad namilo ovid tambaloma yitma. So Yitma is now going to teach me a halacha called Yad, which is the halacha that's going to occupy our minds for this daf. And Yad is a handle. Like, for example, if you had a Yad of a Kli, you lift up the Kli by holding onto its handle. And here, we want to know if in Nevela we excluded the hide as a shomer, but at least can it function as a Yad? Which means the halach of Yad is that the Yad, since it's so necessary for the basar, and you could lift up the basar by lifting up the Yad, so if the meat is attached to the hide, you just lift up the hide and the meat goes with it. Therefore, would I go a step further and say that if a shomer is excluded in the case of nevela, therefore the shomer, meaning the hide, cannot even function as a yad? Tamid lo yitma, the ribui of yitma, is going to teach me that even if we have to go downgrade from, in the case of the hide, from the level of shomer, but nevertheless we stop at the level of yad, and that therefore this pasuk, it's actually the yud of the word yitma. Anyway, is coming to include the shomer, meaning the hide, in the halacha of yad. And what is the halacha of yad? The halacha of yad is that yad is machnis tuma and mevius hatuma. Machnis tuma means that if a sheretz comes in contact with the yad, then the meat itself becomes tamei. And motzi tuma means that if a person comes in contact with the yad, then the yad, again, I'm looking for that word, is a vehicle to export the tuma or transmit the tuma from the basar over to the person who comes in contact with the yad. So yad works in both directions. Tanan Hasam. Now we have a Mishnah in Uktzin, and that Mishnah is focused on Tumas Ochlin. So we're now making a shift back, rewind to Tumas Ochlin, and we're talking about Shomer and Yad. Kol Shu Yad Velo Shomer. So again, a Yad, we said it was a handle, but it doesn't protect the basar. Like, let's say, for example, I don't know, you would take some sort of instrument and a sharp-ended instrument and pierce it into the basar, and now it could serve as a yad, but it's not a shomer. In that category, then tame umetame v'eno mitztarif. Right, so a yad, as we said before, functions in two directions: to bring the tumah and to export the tumah. But it's not mitztarif, because as we said before, a shomer is not mitztarif, and how much more so yad is not mitztarif. Again, mitztarif means to make up the shear of a kazayis of nevela when there's less than a full kazayis worth of basar. So that's category number one in the Mishnah. Now category number two is shomer v'afal pisha eno yad. Right, let's say, for example, you have a hide that's attached to the basar. Now, the basar here, keeps in mind, is ochlin. We're not talking about nevela now. But that hide, although it protected the basar, and maybe continues to do so, but nevertheless, it cannot serve as a handle, so it's not a yad. But since a shomer is one step higher than a yad, because a shomer is actually inherent to the basar, I mean, it protects the basar, is therefore tamei mitame, like we said by yad, but now we go one step further and it's mitztarif. But again, keep in mind, as I mentioned over and over again, that this brisa is talking about tumas ochlin, because the word mitztarif could never possibly apply, as we saw in our Mishnah at the beginning of this parak, to nevela. Now we have the third category, lo yad v'lo shomer. It's neither a yad nor a shomer. Lo tamei v'lo metame. So that's pretty straightforward. Okay. So now what we have here in this Mishnah in Uktzin is an established principle that the yad is both tamei umetame, right? It's a vehicle to be metame the food, and it's also a vehicle to transmit the tumas ochlin to another food. Yados heichik sive. What's the source in the Torah for yad in tuma? Tichsiv, and this is a pasuk that we read yesterday. If you remember, we took out a chumash, and the pasuk says, "V'chiyutan mayim al zera." So keep in mind that the mayim is now functioning as a machshir for the zera is at ochel. V'nafal nivlasam olav tomei hu lachem. Which means that the zera, since it had water on it, which is one of the Shem Mashkin, it now becomes mukshal kabel tuma, and if, let's say, it comes in contact with an avela, it becomes tome. Okay, very straightforward pasuk, but how does that pasuk teach me anything about yados? Now, the pasuk says tome hu lachem, and the word lachem is a superfluous word, and it's interpreted as lachol shebetzarchechem. And that refers to a yad, because the yad functions and we benefit vis-a-vis the food, because now the food has a yad. But the strange thing here is that the Gemara now is going to have another drasha to include yad. Uksiv. This is the previous pasuk there. V'chi yomus min habehema asher hi lachem. Again, the word lachem. So in two contiguous psukim, in Vayikra Perek Yud Aleph, we have the word lachem, l'chol tzarchechem, l'ravos hayados. So why do we need two lachems, each one for anything that's l'chol tzarchechem, meaning that fulfills some sort of function and benefit vis-a-vis the food? That's yadayim. Why do we need two psukim? And the answer is yad lahachnis ula hotzi. Now here we have to, again, if I had a whiteboard, we'd have to write this on the board, because this is the underlying fundamental premise, and that is that the bigger chidush here is to be metame the ochlin, meaning lahachnis. That if a metame, a sheretz, whatever it is, comes in contact with the handle, then it transmits tumah to the ochel. That's a big chiddush. Why is that? Because the ochel is becheskes tara, and you want to now transform it to Tameh, that's a big Chiddush. But if the food is already Tameh, the sheretz fell on the food, and now through the Yad, you want to export and expand the Tumah to something else. So that's not called a Cheskes Tara because you already started with something that's Tameh. So therefore, the big Chiddush is Lahachnis. I'm going to have to write this down for myself. I'm sorry, because it's going to come up over and over again. The bigger Chiddush is Lahachnis. Right? Because Lahachnis means that through the vehicle of the Yad, that which was tar, meaning the Ochel, become Tameh. Aval Yad Lahachnis v'shomer l'tzarev lo. So let's read it again. The Gemara is arguing against the logic. No, just 1 second. I think I skipped. I ran a little bit ahead of myself because the Gemara repeats itself. So anyway, the Gemara says the following. We now have two psukim for yados, for yad. One is lahotzi, and then another one, a bigger chiddush, even lahachnis. So that's as far as yad is concerned. What about shomer? The answer is that if the shomer protects the ochlin, like the husk protecting the kernel, and is shomer lahachnis lo tzilot tzarka kavacham miyad. Meaning, once you derived yad from two psukim, lahachnis ulahotzi, I don't need a pasuk for shomer lahachnis ulahotzi, because shomer lo kolshke. As we said before, the function and the relationship to the ochel of a shomer is that much more profound than that of a yad, because it protects the ochel. Is therefore we have now the question of shomer de koser rachmana lamal. Remember, we had that pasuk on Amid Beis on the bottom that I re-mentioned today about kol zeres orei, etc., that was adding the husk of the kernel, which is a shomer. Why do I need a pasuk for the shomer? If I could derive shomer with a kal vachomer from yados, why did the Torah have to teach me shomer? Shma mino l'tzaref. In other words, once I've covered my bases as far as deriving yados, lachnis hotzi, and shomer, lachnis lahotzi, then any other pasuk, like the one we said before, which is I'll read the pasuk again just to make sure. I'll call zera zarua asher yizra, and that's coming to include a shomer, but I already derived a shomer from a kal vachomer from yad, and the answer is coming to teach me l'tzarev that if the ochel is less than a kibetza, but the husk will add and be mashlim the shir of kibetza, then that's exactly what we're going to do, because we have this extra pasuk for shomer. So now the Gemara raises the following question. Again, it's a puzzle. The ema yad lahachnis v'lo lahotzi. You've got three psukim, and you're juggling them. You want to juggle it in a way that I have two psukim for Yad for Lahachnis Lahotzi and a third pasuk for Shomer Litzarev. Why not do it a different way? Why not juggle it a different way? What do they call that Scrabble game? You know that where you put the pieces and you shake them up and then you pour it out and see if you can make a right. So the Gemara wants to shake it up in a different way. Ema Yad Lahachnis. Maybe we need one pasuk Lahachnis. V'lo Lahotzi, which undermines everything we've been saying until now, because we said that the bigger chiddush was lahachnis. Now Gemara is going to reject this, but I'm just telling you the mechanics of it. So now I have one pasuk for yad, and now I'm going to use two psukim for shomer. Why? Because shomer lahachnis ulahotzi. Because shomer, as we said before, is much more profound, has a greater propensity to be metame. And now, since in the case of Yad, I didn't have a pasuk for lahotzi, the second pasuk will be adding lahotzi and upgrading the shomer. And then I have a third pasuk. Just one second. Okay, I have to work that last piece out. But anyway, aval yad lahotzi, right? So we don't know now yad lahotzi v'shambal etzaref. We don't have a pasuk for that low. So Gemara says, what are you talking about? Yad lahachtis v'lo lahotzi lo mos tzamer. You can't say that the Torah was mar yad for lahachnis and I mean lahachnis is a bigger chiddush. Hashta iyule mi ayle afuke mi boy. If you've already told me that the yad could function to bring tuma into the ochel, which had a cheskes tara, then you don't have. It goes without saying that yad lafuke would certainly be meaningful in order to transmit the tuma of the ochel when it was already tameh to something outside, to some ochel. Okay, so now let's correct it and do it the other way around. That yad is teaching me in the case of yad that it's only lahotzi, which again is a less of a chiddush because you already have ochlin that it's meim, but lahachnis not. And then the other pasuk is going to teach you shomer lahotzi ulahachnis. Now shomer is upgraded and teaches you even that greater chiddush of lahachnis, which means that in the case of the shomer, if let's say a sheretz comes in contact with a husk, it will now convey the tumah to the kernel. Avayad lachnis v'shomer litzarif lo. So b'kitzar ma'isa, we need an extra drasha in order to establish that yad is metame even lahachnis. And then we could derive shomer lahachnis lahotzi from kavah chomer. And then we have another pasuk which is free to teach me that shomer is mitztarev. So Gemara says yad yisera ksiv. We have another extra word yad in the parsha of Tanur v'Kirayim. So Tanur Kirayim are two different types of ovens, a larger oven, a smaller oven. Anyway, they contracted tumah. And if I'm not mistaken, okay, I don't want to stick my foot in my mouth, but we'll see back to how the makeup of the Tanur is. But anyway, and there, so let's read that whole pasuk. It says, I don't have the pasuk here. All right, anyway, the end of the pasuk says, Lachem. Again, another pasuk lachem. This is number 3. Lachem l'chol tzorchechem l'ravos etzayodos. So now we have 2 lachems to teach me yodos, right? Because lachem l'tzorchechem means that it functions on your behalf to benefit for the thing. And now, once we have 2 psukim, then lahachnas lahotzi, we can now derive shomer with a kal v'chomer and use the other pasuk for mitztarif. Okay. Now, the premise of the Gemara until now is that we don't need all the psukim for yad, and therefore we have 1 extra pasuk for shomer to teach me that shomer is mitztarif. So Gemara now questions whether or not you really have 1 superfluous pasuk of yad. Hai minai miyata. Lichtov Rachmana Bizroim. Right, we had a drasha from Zroim to teach you yad. V'leisu hanach minayu. Right, and we wanted to have a derivation for a tanur or nevela. So now we go into the laws, the rules of pircha. Mal is Ram Shekei to Masa Meruba. Maybe the reason the Torah recognizes yad as another method of tumah in the case of zroim, of seeds, is because to Masa Meruba. Now, what does that mean, to Masa Meruba? It means that an ochel could acquire tumah from a rishon l'tumah, become a sheni l'tumah. But a tanur can only be makabel tumah from an avha tumah, which is a sheretz. A sheretz fell into the oven. So lichtov rachmana b'tanur, maybe we'll switch around and we'll use tanur as the prototype. V'leisei hanach minayu, and now we're going to derive zroim and nevela from tanur. Yet there's a chumrah in tanur that doesn't apply neither to seeds nor to nevela, and that is malatanu shekei metami me'aviro, meaning if there's a sheret suspended inside the tanur, so it's metame mi'avir, and the tanur now contracts tumah through its airspace, which has no parallel neither in seeds nor in nevela. Is lichtav rachmana b'nevela? Maybe we'll try a third possibility. Maybe the Torah could have been teaching me nevela, and I derive tanur and zroim from nevela. Is mal nevela shekei metame odom. Right, nevela we said is an avatuma, and it could be metame odom v'kelim. And not only that, it's metame b'masa, which means that if you carry a nevela, you become tamei, even if you didn't have any contact at all with the nevela. You just carried it, which is not true and not applicable to seeds and ochlin and the tanur. And not only that, there's a third chumrah in nevela, and that is tuma yotzis migufa. It's inherently tame, right? The tanur contracted tuma through the sheretz, and so to the ochel. The ochel per se is tar, but in the case of nevela, nevela mitzad atzma, in and of itself is tmeya. So if this be the case, then every one of these three have a pircha, and therefore none of these three could serve as the malame to teach us, because we'll always have the pircha of the chumrah, and therefore I need all three psukim. So again, let's just if we're following the thread of the Gemara, it's that if we have an extra pasuk for yados, then I could use it for shomer. For example, that it's mitzaref in Ochlin to the shear of kibbetz. But now that we've come to the conclusion that all three psukim in yados are necessary because no one single pasuk could teach me the other two, so now I don't have a pasuk for shomer. So now the Gemara introduces a tzad hashava. Chana michal lo asya, teisei chana betray. We're going to take two of these. We have three candidates. We have seeds. We've got the oven. We've got the nevela. Let's choose two and derive the third, which means we don't need the third pasuk. Hey teisei, which two? Lo lichtav rachmana b'Yisrael. Let's say we need nevela and tanur to teach us roim. V'teisei v'hanach is mala hanach shkein mitamim shelo behechsher. Right, nevela is tamei v'tzaratzmo. The oven is tamei once the sheretz goes into the oven. We don't need any of the sheva mashkin, but seeds like ochlin in general require mashkin. So therefore, maybe the Torah was machmir and introduced yados in these two cases, but not in the case of seeds, because in the case of seeds, the Torah was more makil and said that the seeds are not makabel tumah unless they came in contact with one of the seven machshirim. Let's try a different combination. Tomar Bizroim, right, that we did. I jumped the gun. Now this pircha, which tells me I can't derive zroim because roim are lakula and they require hechsher, Rav Huna rejects it. Peros shelo huchshu b'tanur shelo nigmar malachton dami. You know what? Says Rav Huna, the requirement and the condition of hechsher in the case of seeds and fruits and other ochlim is exactly equivalent to the case of tanur, because in the case of tanur, the tanur is not tummy unless it's after gemar malach, meaning you finish the entire manufacture of the oven. And the manufacturing of ochlin is the sheva mashkin. I'm trying to remember, maybe Rabosa, you could remind me, recently we had a case of an ochel that doesn't require mashkin because it's already like nigmar malachta. Do you happen to recall what it was? Okay, I don't remember right now. Okay, anyway. Ella prichachi. So in the light of Rav Huna, we have to find an alternate pircha to prove that you need all three psukim. Malanach shekei mitam shelo benegia, Toma b'zram shein mitam el benegia. Right, we have the case in Nevela where even if you didn't touch the Nevela, but you carried the Nevela, this Tumas Masa. We have the case of the Tanur where there was no contact between the Sheretz and the Tanur, was just in the airspace, hanging like Pinocchio, right? And it's Tame, but in the case of seeds, the only way that you could be Tame seeds, well, for that matter, any Ochlin, is only through direct contact. So therefore, since the Torah is Mekil and seeds, maybe it didn't accept the Chumr of Yados. Lo lichtov rachmano, let's try another combination. B'tanur v'teisei mehanach, maybe we could derive tanur from the other two. Is malahanach shekena ochel. Right, seeds and nevela, I guess nevela means you can feed it to a guy, are ochlin. An oven is not an ochel. Now, I believe that we're going back to what we learned now on Kuf Tes Vav, which is called a pircha koldu. Do you remember that? And we said mitarte, even a pircha koldu can undermine a tzadashav. This is a pircha koldu. And what difference does it make whether it's a food item or not a food item? A tanur is makabel tuma. That's it. Period. End of quote. So that's called a pircha koldu. Lo lichtov rachmana ben nevela v'teisei mehanoch. Maybe you'll tell me that the pasuk in nevela is superfluous because Adarab nevela is the most chamor of the three, and it's an ochel. I'm just a little confused because we couldn't derive it from Tanur because Tanur is Mitami Bi'avi. I'll just read to you what he writes in the footnote here. If one argues that edible seeds are unique because they have a greater capacity for tumah, right? That's what we said before, that right, it's easier to convey tumah in the case of Zerayim. So we can respond that the case of an oven demonstrates that even something with a lesser capacity of tumah. And if one argues that the oven is unique because airspace, that was my question, we can respond that the case of edible seeds demonstrates that even something without this capacity can be subject to the law of yados. So the common characteristic of edible seeds and ovens, from which we would derive in Etzad Shav and Avela, is that they are tamei and their handles can export their tumah to other items. And it follows, therefore, that nevela, which is likewise tamei, can also export its tumah via a yad. And that's the logic that underlies the Gemara's argument, and therefore yad nevela lamal. Right? So again, we have the case of Yad Lahotzi and from Yad in the case of seeds and the oven, we're going to derive yad l'nevela. So what do I need yad? Why did the Torah have to specify yad l'nevela? And now the Gemara introduces another